Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. It's been quite the day, quite the 24 hours, Tony. It's all been happening. We've been reflecting in real time at points. We've been taking stock of our own thoughts and going away for a bit and thinking about things. How are you doing this evening? How are you feeling about everything that's transpired? Not to be too broad, but just what's your general thoughts this evening, Tony, about everything that's happened today?
Is it too dramatic to say it's the 24 hours that rocked Celtic or shook Celtic or whatever, per many kind of noun you want to describe it? Yeah, I think everybody's just sort of reeling from the shock of it all, John, aren't they? In terms of the manager leaving so quickly, Dermot Desmond's statement, which was one for the ages that you and I both caught a moment in time with last night, which was just in real time. It was fairly. I think the two of us were just incredulous about that. And then so you sort of get the kind of fallout today from that and sort of see where Celtic are heading. You get the runners and riders, all that kind of stuff, don't you? That was expected. And then you get the unveiling of our press conference to announce the interim duo in charge, Martin O'Neill and Shaun Maloney. So it's been busy, John, without too much actually happening, if you get what I mean.
It has been. I think a lot has happened along the way. There's been a lot of like little different plot points and little bits of information that have been uncovered along the way, especially since we were on last night, even since this morning show. And that's kind of why we're doing the evening show tonight, everyone. I know we're usually on in the morning, but we thought it would be good to do a recap of just everything that's happened today, reflect on Matt O'Neill's first press conference as the interim Celtic manager alongside coach Shaun Maloney, who is also there on an interim basis. Go through a few bits of information, talk a wee bit about Kieran McKenna because there was an update on him earlier as well. As I say, there's lots going on. I think we'll start with the Martin O'Neill stuff, Tony.
Yeah.
It was a fairly enlightening press conference, just in terms of his demeanour and how excited he was to be back at Celtic. He has charisma, there's no doubt about that, Tony. What were your thoughts on how he handled the questioning and just kind of what his overall vibe is in terms of returning to Celtic?
I just felt it was the same old Martin O'Neill. Talked a lot, didn't really say too much. There was a wee bit of humour thrown in for good measure. And when you get to the nitty gritty and you ask him about the Rangers game, stuff like that, he always kind of said, yeah, if you know me, then you would know I would never answer stuff like that. So I remember asking him, I might have said this before, and I asked him about the Champions League when Celtic exited the tournament with 9 points. Remember the first ever time they qualified for the Champions League? And I went and sat, I think that was the first time I'd sat in front of him, and I asked him, would a perfect 10 points that season in the Champions League be the kind of benchmark? I think I used the word benchmark for getting through. And he just peered over the glasses and said to me, I will just bat that past you and see if you can catch it in the slips. That was his answer to me, John. And ever since then, I thought, okay, I better not waste his time with banal questions or what he perceived as banal questions. But he's mellowed a fair bit, I have to say. He's very humorous. He's very chatty without saying too much. But he is excited to be back. He mentioned that a few times, didn't he? How much of a hands-on role he's going to have, I'm not so sure, because he turned to Shaun a couple of times and said he knows more about the current team than me. But what he said was he was looking immediately. He wants the team to create chances and score more goals and be more attack-minded and win football matches, which was fair enough. And the Rangers question, I was actually quite chuffed with the answer he gave at the Rangers question because Celtic have an important game to win tomorrow night, John. So I'm glad he turned all the focus and energy on that. So I was happy enough with that. But yeah, I just felt it was a kind of same old Martin O'Neill. Meet the new Martin O'Neill, same as the old Martin O'Neill for me.
Yeah, it was a different tone from everything that's been going on at Celtic over the last few weeks and months. It feels to me like Celtic are in a really serious moment, and Martin O'Neill, just because of the natural way he is with the media and natural way he carries himself, he brought a bit of humour to it, which isn't a bad thing,
No,
and it might alleviate some concerns and anxieties some people have around Celtic at the moment, and I think that all that is fair. I think in terms of what came out of it, I think it was, I think you're right. I think it was confirmed essentially that I think Shaun Maloney's at least going to be taking the lead for this Falkirk game tomorrow in terms of, if not
Yeah,
team selection, then certainly the system of play and how Celtic are set up for that match, which I'm intrigued to see because I don't think Shaun Maloney's team or his time at Hibs, for example, was particularly that different to the way that Brendan Rodgers approached the game. So I'm interested to see how different Celtic actually look tomorrow. It's also, Martin O'Neill's all about the emotion of football, all about almost we talk about these things in football being intangibles, stuff you can't really, grab. He's about belief. He's about instilling belief in players as individuals, instilling belief in a team as a unit who have belief in each other as well. I think that's a strong part of Matt O'Neill's game, isn't it? His whole
yeah,
managerial ethos is a lot about getting into the psychology of players and getting something out of them that maybe they didn't even know they had. And I'm intrigued to see how that works in the short term, because he was very clear as well. Another thing we could take away from the press conference, Tony, is that very clear that he's just basically warming the seat for the next guy coming in.
yes,
He says, he's here on an interim basis. We don't know how long that interim period will be, but it doesn't seem like this is going to be. I mean, from all indications today, it seems like there'll be a fairly quick turnaround in appointing a permanent Celtic manager over the next few weeks.
yeah, I would say so, John. Excuse me. We spoke off air and we questioned the wisdom of having a press conference for a managerial duo who might only be there for 3 or 4 games, possibly. Any more than that, then alarm bells will start ringing. There might be a serious inquiry. Martin O'Neill said he wouldn't have came back for any other club, so he's doing it for his love of Celtic and obviously to help out his friend who is Dermot Desmond. So we know all that. I'm intrigued, John, to see if he'll bring back the big guys in the team or put them in more central positions. Because when he was at Celtic the first time round, he was all about height, wasn't he? And physicality. I'm talking the likes of Austin Trusty. I'm talking the likes of maybe putting Arnold Engels in a more central position. Big guys. With a presence. That intrigues me, John, because I know it's 20 years since he last managed Celtic, but that was his prototype and his blueprint. Get big players in the team in key areas. Sutton, Hartson were up front. You had me Albi Valharan at the back. You had Bobo. Height and presence and a domineering physicality in terms of using a bit of brute force allied to no amount of skill. So I'll be interested to see what he does with players with height in the team. If he does sort of see that as the kind of still the way to go about it. And I've got a feeling that he might influence Shaun Maloney in that sense, have an input that way. I'll be intrigued to see tomorrow about the team selection as well. But yeah, he was very honest about how long he expected to be there, wasn't he, John? Which is not too long. And he is
But
73.
he's naturally self-effacing, isn't he? He's not.
Yeah.
He's never. Martin O'Neill's not an arrogant man by his nature, but even in the way he presents himself in the media, he's even extra self-deprecating at times, isn't he? So
Yeah.
that's just the way he handles stuff sometimes. So part of me also thinks that obviously Martin O'Neill would love to have a few good results while he's in the post at Celtic. But then what does that mean? And I guess this gets to the crux of maybe my issues with some of this, Tony, is that Martin O'Neill's such an iconic presence. He's a big presence. He's a big figure in Celtic's history. What happens if Martin O'Neill wins 3 games? Does that not put any new manager in a potentially difficult position? In terms of if he's here for an interim basis, he wins 3 or 4 games, then suddenly the new guy's under a lot of pressure to replicate that. This is why a lot of clubs over time have kind of just gone for the youth coach option or the kind of lower level coach to just stem the tide until you get your man in place and pave the way for that, because then nothing overshadows the new guy coming in. There's an element of just going for a big icon here, and what are the consequences going to be? And that's really the unknowns for me. What are the consequences of all this, good or bad, with how it goes with O'Neill?
It's that classic line, John. Imagine he wins tomorrow. Imagine he beats Rangers and they do it impressively. and then whoever's next, they win that, and then all of a sudden Celtic get the new guy coming. It's that old adage, isn't it? It's like taking the karaoke mic from Frank Sinatra, and that's what
Exactly.
it'll be like,
Yeah.
right? That's what it'll
Yeah.
be like. You've just outlined that there, and if he does win games impressively, him and Shaun Maloney, there will be a clamour for them to stay in situ, John. And how that's going to play out, that dynamic will play out, is something that Celtic will have to confront if that turns out to be the case. Now, you said there, Martin O'Neill is desperate to win football matches for Celtic. He is such an iconic figure and a legend at the club. He doesn't want to 2 games in lose to Rangers in a National Cup semi-final. I'm sorry, it's just not in his DNA. So to quote himself, he will do everything in his power to bring success to Celtic for the time that he's there. And success means winning that semi-final. So I guess nobody will be working harder in terms of what Celtic can achieve. I think you'll leave all the training and the tactic stuff to Shaun Maloney, and then he'll do what he did when Steve Walford and John Robertson were there, come in and rouse the troops with the speeches and tell them to get the fire in the belly, and they'll go out wanting to run through brick walls for Martin. That was kind of the way the dynamic worked when he was successful in 2002, 2005, and it seemed it worked perfectly, didn't it?
Yeah. And it's part of me is also excited by it, Tony. I'm not going to lie. I'm not just completely skeptical about this because, as I've said, Martin Neil's just such a formative figure for me in my Celtic supporting life and how I think about Celtic and really what I peg the ambition of Celtic to be at. I think Martin O'Neill really instilled that in me to an extent when I was a teenager, and I'm I'm excited about O'Neill being in the post because I really like Martin O'Neill. I'm a little bit concerned with the overall situation and kind of how this has happened, how this has transpired. I don't want to be too much of a downer. I'm not trying to be a downer, Tony. I'm just like I'm reflecting on the last 24 hours. I'm listening to what Martin O'Neill's having to say, where he got almost a panicked phone call from Dermot Desmond yesterday afternoon about this kind of change, and almost it sounded like he was talked into it a little bit, Tony. I have to be honest, and that's not, that's I don't think. And I'm not naive, I'd imagine, and I believe there's been some reporting elsewhere. I think Graham Spears reported, and Graham Spears is close to Martin O'Neill, that O'Neill had met with Dermot Desmond a few weeks ago. Unrelated, not about the job, but I think Dermot Desmond was essentially sounding him out
Sure.
for a change that might have had to be made. So I'm not totally naive to think that this has all just completely come together in the last 24 hours.
No.
But I also can't ignore the fact that Martin O'Neill's not received this phone call from Dermot Desmond before, and a lot of people talk about the relationship between Desmond and O'Neill and how they're pals and friends and whatever. I'm led to believe they're not quite as close as that, and I think the fact Dermot Desmond hasn't called O'Neill previously to bring him back to the club is interesting in this context of he's the man to turn to in this situation. So again, it leads to this thing for me, Tony, where this is all in the mind of Dermot Desmond. He's the man with a plan here, rightly or wrongly. For a lot of people, wrongly. Should all this come down to the whim of one person? That's where it lands for me, and I think that's why it's kind of sitting a little bit uneasily for me tonight.
I think there's nervous excitement, isn't there, John? This is going to be wonderful, or it's going to be worse than before. Martin O'Neill hasn't managed for 6 years. Remember, 6 years. That's a long time. He's 73 years old. I'm not saying he's not up to speed with what's happening at Celtic because he's doing his punditry, so he has to be. But she said himself, there's a difference between sitting and criticising everybody and no flack coming your way and not giving the proverbial, than actually being in the chair. And you're just hoping that, and I think Dermot Desmond is hoping that the old Martin O'Neill magic, comes back into play here. He's still a wise man. He's still very knowledgeable about football. He learned from some of the best, arguably one of the best, and Brian Clough and all sorts of stuff like that. So he is like he covers all bases. But like you, there's that wee bit in your mind that's saying, is this the right thing? And as you say, it's on the whim of one man who's asking his friend to temporarily place his hands on the tiller because he believes he's a safe pair of hands. That's the bottom line, isn't it? Dermot Desmond believes that Martin O'Neill is the safest pair of hands to temporarily steer the good ship Celtic through however long he has to steer it into calm waters. Calm waters being winning football matches, but his second football match is against Rangers at Hampden. And you're just like, okay. And if he's placing a lot of trust in Shaun Maloney, then everybody's going to point to Shaun Maloney's time at Hibs as a manager and say there was nothing there that made you leap out and say that's the future Celtic manager. Shaun Maloney ruled himself out of that today as well by saying he wasn't thinking that way. So I think a lot of supporters might have breathed a sigh of relief that way and thought, okay, that's not the grand plan moving forward. But, I think we can't escape the fact that Celtic are in dire need of winning football matches, John. They cannot afford to slip up tomorrow night against Falkirk in terms of the championship, or a title race, sorry. And that's the most important thing for me. Can these two guys just come together for as long as they're there and win football matches? That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that is the bottom line, Tony. And I think that's maybe where I'm at as well. It's just like I'm still so worried about the direction of the season. I don't think this is. I mean, I'm seeing some comments in some places and speaking to some people I know where it's just like in their mind, they've already written off this season to an extent. And that's just not the case for me. Like, I think there's just still too much in this season to fight for and play for and for Celtic to progress. And you don't want a situation getting any worse than it has been. You want what had happened under Brendan Rodgers to be Celtic bottoming out the season and then gradually climbing themselves up. Just the point here, the Jagged God saying man with a plan. Listen, I was being slightly ironic there in the sense of clearly there's not a grand plan in a sense of a strategy. Again, this is the whims of one person. So I was being flippant there. So Martin O'Neill also, they confirmed Mark Fotheringham is also in place in the coaching team. John Kennedy has left Celtic, so they need extra bodies in on the coaching pitch alongside Maloney. We knew Shaun Maloney was going to be taking training as well, Tony, because that's just not what Martin O'Neill's kind of, even in his first spell at Celtic, he wasn't really the man involved, heavily in training sessions. So Maloney will be there. Mark Fotheringham, Mark Fotheringham a bit. You've interviewed him in the past. How are you feeling about what he brings to Celtic? Martin O'Neill very much talking up the fact he's a bit of a character. Shaun Maloney suggesting that as well.
He's very sure of himself. Again, very knowledgeable. Worked under Felix Magath in Germany, and likes to tell you that as well. Didn't have a particularly great spell as Huddersfield manager, if you're using reference points where he was the main man. But he was successful in Germany. But yeah, he's a character, all right. He talks a wonderful game. He's very knowledgeable, and he's very sure of his own ability, John. I'll put it that way. And it might be what Celtic need in the interim period just now, a character like that around telling them that, you're good footballers, I'm a good coach. If you listen to me, we'll do the right things together. So I'm all for that. I don't question people's judgment. If Martin O'Neill's bringing somebody like that in, and Shaun Maloney came through at the same time with him, didn't he? Round about the time when Martin O'Neill was the manager, so I think 1990, 2003, I think Mark Fotheringham was there. So he'll know these two guys inside out. So there is that link as well, that connection. And throwing them all together, then you're hoping that they can produce magic. But yeah, Fozzie, as he's known, I believe.
Apparently so.
So yeah. But yeah, I think that's a man who's very sure of what he brings to the table in a coaching sense. And well, he's got an interim period to prove that and do his best for Celtic and get results on the board. And I'll be the first to congratulate him if he does.
So what else has happened today? The AGM has been announced for November, 21st of November. The AGM will be held. That will be a moment for around the club, all the discussion around the club in terms of the direction of the club in general, protests around the club. I think resolutions are being aimed specifically at certain board members, etc. So Celtic released that information today. They also released their full annual report. Obviously, they had the financial results. The main headline numbers were released last month, but they released a full or PDF full of lots more detail and information. So they've released that today as well. as you can imagine, just given everything going on, I haven't had the chance to go through that yet. We will do that as the week progresses and as things develop and head towards the AGM. So there's lots of that going on, Tony. And in conjunction with that, the Celtic Fans Collective announcing that I think really the first in person demonstration protest to take place outside of Celtic Park since all of this has started to unfold will take place tomorrow night ahead of the Falkirk game, which I think is another wee escalation in all of the protest action. There's been banners unfurled and there's been tifo displays, there's been silent protests, etc. But this is a protest demonstration outside Celtic Park, which is obviously more visible and assuming a little bit more noisy as well. Again, just show me you kind of alluded to earlier is like the pressure on the Celtic board isn't really going away here.
No,
This is going to continue regardless of what I see is a little bit of a sideshow today. You know, a little bit of it was a break from the normality at Celtic, but I think everyone in power at Celtic will soon realise that no ill feeling has really gone away from the people who were already feeling bad about the situation.
it's getting ramped up, John. And also, can you imagine if Martin O'Neill hadn't been introduced alongside John Maloney? Can you imagine the protest and what form it would have taken tomorrow night if they said the interim manager was Shaun Maloney? They would have stormed the Bastille here tomorrow night outside the main stand. I dread to actually think what would have happened. But these guys aren't going away. And as you said, the targets of their ire are still the Michael Nicholson, Peter Law, and Dermot Desmond, and Chris Mackay as well. And I don't think last night helped it in any shape or form.
Actually, it was notable today, Tony, that you know for Dermot Desmond's been notably absent from a lot of their statements to date.
Yeah.
They've kind of made their main focus Peter Lawwell, Michael Nicholson, and Chris Mackay. They've kind of sidestepped the Dermot Desmond issue, just considering that it's a less achievable goal to kind of force change in terms of Dermot Desmond and get him out of the club. Very notable today that in all their communications, Dermot Desmond was front and centre almost. It was a quite an about turn in that sense, which I think is relevant and valid because I think it's strange to be having all these discussions about Celtic without talking about Dermot Desmond because as we know, as we saw over the last 24 hours, he is so involved at Celtic at a high strategic level about the direction of Celtic that really if you've got an issue with the way Celtic is going, you really have an issue with Dermot Desmond too. So he's now front and centre in the eyes of this protest campaign, which I think again is a direct result of everything that happened last night.
Yeah, you have a man who has a controlling shareholding in the club, John, 37.4%, dictating basically what happens. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And no other board member challenging that rule or that kingmaker, decision maker, call him what you like. Basically, what Dermot Desmond says goes on a 37.4% shareholding. And I think the Celtic supporters have had enough, and they're saying, why should this man be doing everything or pulling the strings and conducting the business of Celtic in the way he has done? And over the past 24 hours, he certainly did not cover himself in any glory whatsoever. We spoke about it last night. We faced each other as the words were being read, and we just couldn't believe it. And I'm like you. I totally agree that it's no surprise to me that Dermot Desmond is now they're sharpening their weapons and training them on Dermot Desmond. I fully expected that, and I think if Dermot Desmond thought that last night's statement would quell any unrest, you said it as well. They've threw petrol on a bin fire, haven't they?
Yeah, I actually don't think that I don't think he's that bothered about quelling unrest or anything. I think it's really all of this is just he feels he has the biggest say and that what he says goes, and that's how he thinks and acts at Celtic Football Club. And as the largest single shareholder, he feels that is his right. And obviously, a lot of Celtic supporters feel like the club is obviously culturally owned by the fans, but a lot of Celtic supporters feel that they put in their fair share as well and should have a larger say in what the direction of Celtic should be. And I fully understand that as well. And I think this kind of the schism between the two is going to continue for a fair amount of time yet, regardless of what happens here. As we know, we talked about Martin O'Neill very much saying he's keeping the seat warm for the next guy coming in. The only real update of note on that today, Tony, we had reporting on the Celtic Way that Kieran McKenna is one of the names on Celtic's list, which shouldn't really be of a surprise to anyone, in that Kieran McKenna has long been talked about, I think, in Celtic circles as someone who is impressive to the Celtic hierarchy and the Celtic ownership, and it was actually linked with the job before Brendan Rodgers returned as manager in 2023. So that his name has popped up again isn't much of a surprise. I think there's some thought that his contract at Ipswich might be a complication. He's a very highly paid manager, for instance, and he signed a contract extension last year, which could make it difficult for Celtic and to kind of negotiate, first of all, his release from Ipswich, but then also negotiate terms with him as well. So far from a confirmed or a done deal for Kieran McKenna coming in the building, but again, it's a demonstration of the kind of candidate that Celtic might be looking for to bring Celtic forward. Again, Martin O'Neill kind of laid out today, they're looking for, Martin O'Neill's words where they're looking for a youthful coach, a talented coach who has a bit of pedigree that can bring Celtic forward from this point.
Yeah, I think Kieran McKenna ticks a lot of boxes in terms of Celtic, doesn't he? What is he, 39? He's impressed greatly with Ipswich. You're talking about multi-millions to supposedly buy him out of his contract if Kieran McKenna is to be that man. And if he is, then you have to make sure you don't make a rickets of it the way you did with someone like Eddie Howe. This can't be a long, protracted affair. If Kieran McKenna turns out to be that man, then they have to go in soon, John, and say, yeah, you're the man we want. But again, like we spoke about last night, I want Celtic to do the proper due diligence. I can't say that, John. Due diligence on this and get the best possible candidate. But my worry about that is the nature of Dermot Desmond's statement last night. I think there's some reputational damage being done to Celtic in terms of their quest for a high-level candidate for the managerial post. And any manager worth their salt, one of the first questions they would ask would be, how can I work with this regime? They'll be saying that in their head. And then if they get the chance to sit before the regime, they'll want certain assurances and guarantees, and I just don't think Celtic will be prepared to be forthcoming on such matters. So I think there's reputational damage done to Celtic by Dermot Desmond last night in terms of their pursuit of a new candidate. Lots of people would like to see another name that's mentioned as well. Obviously, Ange Postecoglou's been mentioned. That's fair enough. But, in terms of other candidates in another style and another philosophy, Kjetil Knutsen from Bodo Glimt, he's up for his contract runs out in December, John. The stars could align in that sense. He's been tried and courted many times, I think, by British clubs, but the timing might be right for him. I think he's maybe taken Bodo Glimt as far as he can. He's turned them into a real kind of European football success story, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, undoubtedly has.
In my opinion, John, I don't know if you'll share this, but see if that's the guy you want as well, go and ask the question, John. You have to go and ask the question and get them to tell you yay or nay. And if they say yes, great. If they say no, get them to explain why they don't want to come. I don't mind being knocked back by candidates, but if they give you a valid reason for not coming, it's not the right time or it's not the right club, whatever their reasons are, I just don't want them to go into this half-hearted, botch it again, and then be scrambling around, and it becomes a long, protracted managerial chase, which we've seen in the past. I really want Celtic to, as I say, conduct their due diligence on this and really get their heads together. If they've got a serious candidate, go and get them, John.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. If Celtic manage to find their preferred candidate, I think they should pursue this quite quickly. I don't think anything long protracted does anyone any good, even with O'Neill in charge on an interim basis. I think a quick appointment is needed by Celtic here. But as we know, Tony, a lot of what's happened this year, what Celtic have needed and what Celtic have delivered have been two different things, hasn't it been? So I just think also, are Celtic doomed to just a repeat and recycle discontent here with managers who come in and have a good start, then start to expect more, and then just suddenly butt up against a ceiling of which is control and financial prudence, etc. Are Celtic just doomed to repeat this with the same overall strategy in place? And that's what I'm a bit worried about too. I mean, there's never been a better time for Celtic to just have a complete refresh and think about what they want from their leadership team, what they want from their chief executive, what they want from a potential sporting director. Do I think any of that's going to happen? Frankly, Tony, I don't. I don't think there's going to be any radical change here at Celtic.
No.
I think Dermot Desmond and the rest of the Celtic board are going to appoint someone that makes them feel comfortable and makes them feel like he's a team player, so to speak. I think they've used phrases like that before. Someone who fits into the culture of Celtic from their perspective rather than maybe
Yes.
the one that has kind of was at times pushed by Brendan Rodgers over the last 12 months, where he had eyes on ambition and Celtic pushing on from what he deemed to be a position of strength at the end of last season. I was well covered. I made it quite clear that I do think this was a natural stopping point for Brendan Rodgers. I think he'd run out of road at Celtic for a variety of reasons, not least because I think his team was deteriorating on the park quite rapidly. But you can't deny that Brendan Rodgers did have some sort of vision for Celtic. Clearly, it clashed with the Celtic board, and so I think they're going to go with someone who makes them feel comfortable moving forward. What that means for Celtic, I don't know. I think in a position like the manager, you need someone with a burning ambition that is going to naturally clash against the conservatism of the Celtic board. But what do I know? And I mean, you saw that with Ange. Ange clashed with it to an extent while fitting in. Brendan Rodgers clashed with it to an extent while clearly not fitting in. And I just think you need that burning ambition in that post. And I think it's just naturally over time going to clash with whoever's in charge if Celtic continue on their current course.
You said, what do you know? You've just outlined what you know there. That's happened with the last two managers. They have had burning ambition for this football club, which has not been met by the men at the top. The Suits and the Blazers, the clubs and the ties, call them what you like. And as you say, your worst fear is that Celtic appoint another managerial candidate like that, who will just mould and fit and will be malleable and put into shape into what they want. You hesitate to use the word a yes man, but that's basically it, isn't it? Brendan Rodgers wasn't a yes man, Ange Postecoglou wasn't a yes man, because they had visions of Celtic or plans and dreams for Celtic, the likes of you and I are music to our ears. They wanted to see Celtic become an entity, far beyond domestic dominance. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, John. And I don't think that's the unreachable star, as they say. We got a taste of it last season under Brendan Rodgers. Went to the Allianz Arena in Munich and produced one of the best European away displays I think I've seen from a Celtic team, and certainly in my lifetime. And Ange had that ambition for Celtic as well. And the common denominator is, John, they clashed with the men at the top. And what frightens me is 20 years on since Martin O'Neill was the manager of Celtic, there's about 3 or 4 directors that are still there, aren't they? And in situ, the same people, 20 years on, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, as I said. And you say to yourself, so we're not really evolving as a football club in that sense at that level. We're evolving every now and again where we'll win stuff, we'll automatically qualify for the Champions League. Everything's hunky-dory, but we're not evolved at all. In 20 years, there's been a catalogue of failure to prepare managers for top-level European competition. We all know those games and we all can pick them out. And my worst fear is that they do what you've just said. They bring in somebody like Kieran McKenna and say to him, Champions League football's a bonus. Nah, Champions League football for me should be the prerequisite for any Celtic manager, and then making you a competitive force in that competition when you get there in that tournament. You have to treat that with the reverence and respect that it deserves. And I think Celtic for far too long have just woefully and woefully neglected what you actually need to be a competitive team in that environment, John. And that's that like you, I have that nagging doubt in my head as well that the next manager will be able to achieve those dreams because certain people lack ambition.
Yeah, or it's not even yeah, it's ambition. It's just a hesitance and a resistance in almost everything they do, and the way they handle negotiations, and the way, as I say, small c conservatism. That's the Celtic board,
It's
and
their
that's what they
default
are.
position, John. It's their
Yeah.
default, So, and
And I
that's
just think football's changing, Tony. I just think football's changing to a degree that Celtic are not keeping up with across the board. And you want Celtic to keep up with this. I think it needs fresh ideas. It needs fresh blood at that level, at the non-executive level, at the board level. And it's really, I've got nothing against Michael Nicholson other than I don't think he's that functional as a communicative Celtic CEO. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure I would enjoy speaking to him. But it's just like, you're looking for something different at Celtic from the way it has been, and the way Celtic has been successful domestically. It's undeniable that Celtic have had a degree of domestic success that we maybe will never ever see again. Okay, and I accept that. And what I'm saying is, I feel like football's changing, and I feel like Celtic need to keep up, and I feel like Celtic need to also modernise and push forward. And nothing
yeah,
over the last 24 hours has given me hope that that is the case, despite me being broadly in favour of Brendan Rodgers leaving Celtic. I do think it was necessary at that point because Celtic were no longer functioning on the pitch or off the pitch. And I think it was a necessary change. But the way they've gone about it, and their action since and everything since really has just filled me with further unease. Saying that, Tony, I'm going to take the Martin O'Neill thing at face value and just accept, he's here on an interim basis. There's no
yeah.
point in getting too stressed out about it. Enjoy it for what it is and see what comes from it. In that sense, I'm looking to tomorrow's match against Falkirk, and I'm thinking, okay, let's just see what happens here. It is something different. It's a change it's a breakup from all the dour misery that has been floating around Celtic for the last few months, and let's see what the team can take from Martin O'Neill, because as we know, he does have football wisdom. I think he has a psychological edge that most managers don't have, and I'm hesitant to say that I'm fairly excited about what he gets out of this team and whether he does get something out of this team, even though he's been in the building less than 24 hours.
It's cautious excitement, isn't it, John? It's just like this goes one or two ways. It's going to be absolutely brilliant, or it's going to be a nightmare. And I'm pretty hesitant to say that it'll fall down on the nightmare scenario, because I still think Martin O'Neill's got a lot to offer. See, for me, John, Martin O'Neill would be your ideal director of football at Celtic. That's a person, my
If
phrase
he
is
was
always that's
motivated to do that job,
yeah,
I
that's
think you're right.
a person
Yeah,
of interest for Celtic, and in a position like that, where he would let the manager manage the club, but he's font and knowledge of and wisdom about football. I mean, you could bounce off if you got the right managerial candidate to work and coexist alongside Martin O'Neill. That'd be a match made in heaven, and because you could tap into that, that's a wonderful resource that you could tap into, and just what he knows about football as well, and that's why someone like that coming back on an interim basis, I'm like, surely you should be saying to him, Martin, come in and help steer the managerial ship. But once this is over, you're going up here because we need you to help the new guy that's coming in. We want your input in that as well. I know he was asked a question about the input in the new manager, and he said years ago his ego would have allowed him to suggest all and sundry, but he'll probably not be involved. He should be involved. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. You've got to ask guys like that their
yeah.
opinion on who the new Celtic manager would be. Have you seen anybody that fits that bill? Because these guys watch football from all over the world. The Champions League in particular. So you have to just canvass their opinion and say, do you know what? We would like you to be involved a lot more in that process. For me, Martin O'Neill, as a director of football at Celtic, is the ultimate no-brainer, alongside the right managerial candidate, one that you have conducted all your homework on.
I guess my worry about that, Tony, and it's just like you need someone in that role to be living football on a day-to-day basis, and Martin O'Neill's not been doing that for the last few years. He's been semi-retired. He speaks in the speaking circuit. He does media, a lot of media. He does a lot of talk sport, a lot of radio shows. I think he had a podcast, etc. Like I think at this stage, you're needing someone who lives and breathes football on a day-to-day basis. I think that has a track record of making a recruitment model work somewhere else. Frankly, and that's just how I understand what you're saying. He's peerless for me. He's a totemic figure in Celtic's history, and I've got nothing against Martin O'Neill at all. I'm thinking about Celtic in 2025, what it needs to be going forward, and the clubs that Celtic are competing against have this expertise in place at a wide variety of levels within their football clubs, and I'm struggling to see the outright football expertise within Celtic at the moment.
Yeah, oh, without a doubt. I just think there's a role for him there, John, to be honest. Maybe not as director of football per se. I still think he would be a good director of football, but even, bringing in somebody as well, like a three-pronged attack, John, in terms of your footballing strategy and your football coaching department and other offshoots or branches off of that. But I just think you need to get as many people who love this football club and breathe this football club. And I think Maloney would breathe this football club if you put him in a role like that. I think he's just he's his own man in that sense just now. He can do what he wants, and he's telling you he is doing what he wants. But I think if you were to say to him, look, how about coming back? I'm sure he'd be up for that. You know what I mean? But listen, I just think they've got a valuable input towards shaping the future of Celtic, as you say, and being a modern club, right? A modern club and a big club. I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. Celtic Masquerade is a big club, John. Last night's shenanigans told me everything you need to know about Celtic being a big club. That was amateurish, to say the least, and it's no way to conduct any business at all. And we've had our say on it, but there are times when my club infuriates me because of that attitude towards their business model. And last night, I just felt, you just left last night thinking, where do we go now? What happens next? And and people will say that Celtic are a big club. I get that they are a big club, but there are times when they just don't act like it at all.
No, I agree with some of the actions and some of the rhetoric we've seen coming out of Celtic over the last few months has not been ideal in the slightest. And Celtic exist and persist regardless. And again, playing Falkirk tomorrow, we'll see what team is fielded. We'll see if there's any changes tactically. We'll see if there's any changes in approach. Obviously, I think it's interesting, at least for Celtic supporters at the moment. As we know, Celtic fans had grown frustrated with the stale football on display from Brendan Rodgers. So it's at least going to be different, and we might see a little bit of freshness in selection. You don't know who's going to respond to these events, who's going to respond by a bit of fire, who's going to go within themselves. It's all up in the air, and I guess that makes it an interesting place, Tony. But thanks for your time, Tony. Thanks everyone in the live chat. Leave your comments below about how you feel about everything that's going on today. Rodgers' exit, Martin O'Neill's arrival, what you heard from Martin O'Neill. There'll be a lot of people encouraged by what Martin O'Neill had to say today and comforted by how he conducted himself in front of the media and how he was. And that's fair play. So let us know that as well. We'll be back tomorrow morning with lots more. Got loads of coverage on the website. Celtic are back to doing separate interviews with the manager and newspapers now and various media outlets. So even if you watched Martin O'Neill's broadcast press conference earlier, there's a different interview up on celticway.co.uk as we speak, a different set of questions, a different set of answers. So there's lots going on, and we'll be back with lots more. I had a wee bit of an analysis piece on the end of Brendan Rodgers' days up on the site as well. Tony's got something up going on in the morning, a more personal reflection on how he felt things transpired with Brendan Rodgers. So there's lots going on, lots of analysis, lots of coverage, lots of new quotes, lots of news. We'll be across it all on the YouTube channel, but also at celticway.co.uk. Tony, thanks for your time. We'll catch you next time. Everyone else, we'll see you next time on the Celtic Way.